Hello, Colin.
This is such an important topic, and we don't often talk about startup failures. We talk about successes, but what we really don't talk about is the impact on the entrepreneur and how it affects us. Personally, I think that startup failures, and there's a friend of mine today, I don't know if you've heard, Santiago had he's shutting down his facility. Not the, he's our CrossFit coach, and he's not shutting down the CrossFit gym, but he's shutting down the um, the co-working space that he set up. And he responded by saying, "You know what? It was a really good learning experience." And I think that's what this is all about. So I'm just going to listen in, be quiet, and not bother the patrons in the lounge here.
All right. Well, Michael, I'll hand it off to you. This is your show, The Complete Entrepreneur. I will remind everyone that we do record this show and we have replays turned on, and you can listen to recordings of all past episodes of The Complete Entrepreneur and many other great shows on Startup Club over at the website for Startup Club, which is at startup.club. You see a little pattern there. And we encourage you to visit that site and sign up for our mailing list to be kept informed of everything going on in Startup Club here on Clubhouse. And with that, Michael, take off.
Oh, it's great to be here once again on the Complete Entrepreneur. It's a session I must admit I love actually hosting. In fact, I find it's a real privilege to host the Complete Entrepreneur because it's one of the few sessions I think I've seen anyway in Clubhouse or elsewhere where we not only explore what does it mean to run a business as an entrepreneur, but we explore the life of an entrepreneur and we begin to unpack that. This is a session we run at 5 p.m. Eastern Time every single week, and I'm down here in Melbourne, Australia, and it's a 7 a.m. Here looking at a beautiful sky. But let me tell you, the topic we're looking at today is one we began to explore last week, and this is probably the first time we've run a consecutive topic across 2 weeks, and that is dealing with failure. And it's a really tough one for entrepreneurs because we're told we have to be upbeat all the time. We're told we have to be like rah rah rah. Everything's going well here, yeah. And it's sort of like a Jedi mind trick on ourselves. Nothing to be seen here. Yeah, it's a tough one because dealing with failure is something every entrepreneur, number one, will face and will have to wrestle through. And in many respects, how you actually go along and encompass failure at times, whether it's the collapse of a business, whether it's the loss of a major client, the breakup of a partnership, whatever it is, you're going to have to deal with failure at some point. And it can be a real struggle. I remember as I began to reflect on my own life, like where did that resilience come from to push through times of failure? Where did that tenacity come from? And I remember when I was about, I think I was about probably 6 years old. I was the third child in the family, and I was the youngest at the time, and I remember playing games such as, you ever played a game called Stratego or Risk? Risk is probably the more famous game, um, and whereas world domination is the goal. Um, and I remember playing that game, and I was there at 6 years old, and I'm playing against my brother and sister, and sometimes my father would join in, and they're like 8, 10, and my father obviously a lot older. And clearly, I was at an age disadvantage in that scenario. But one thing I would do, even when I reflect on my own life, and I would, at the end of a game, and inevitably I would lose, I would think about what actually happened. Every step of every turn, what actually occurred. Where did I go wrong? And later on, as I began to play chess with my father, I did the same thing. I remember he used to sometimes do fool's mate with me. That 3 move game ended. And I think there's no way you can stop this. What a stupid game. You cannot stop. It's inevitable that I was going to fail. Then I went away and I really began to think about it. And I realized, there's solutions here. And it's the same as an entrepreneur. Yeah, one of the things we should look at is not necessarily look at the events in our life or the events in our business and everything as a failure, but look at them as opportunities to learn. That seems like a some sort of buzzword almost, or a buzz phrase. It's an opportunity to learn. It's all very well to say that, but when you're going through it, let me tell you, it's much harder. But there's a time when you've gone through the emotional trauma, quite often there is, of dealing with a failure of some description. You need, as an entrepreneur, to go away and to think through all those steps, even as I did as a 6-year-old, thinking through the steps of the different games and so forth like that. Think through the steps. Where did I go wrong? What actually happened? Speaking of which, gaming stayed with me for all of my life. And one of the things I love about games, and I actually said this to one of my sons-in-law now. I'd play a computer game or something like that with him. And he'd say, "Why do you like playing games?" And I said, "Well, not only you're fun and we have a good time and everything, but I really get to know how you think. I really get to know how you think. Games can teach you a lot about yourselves in a very uh, in a good environment. Like, compared to, say, if you're playing games called business, then it can be quite stressful. But games are a really interesting microcosm, and you can learn a lot about the people around with you who are playing a game, or you can learn a lot about yourself as well. How you do deal with the fact that you've tried to go along and defeat this evil overlord or something like that in this game for like the last um, uh, 5 days, and you've never managed to do it, and you've got to work this out. It becomes now a strategy discussion in your mind versus a I'm a failure discussion. Likewise, in your business, I sometimes think that's the way we need to approach our businesses, is that these times of quotation marks failures, they're more to look at them in terms of strategy and tactics. How do we get around them? I'll bring this back now to a real business problem I'm working on right now. I work in an industry where any clients of substance, they do whatever they possibly can to not be found for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into. And it's actually really difficult to find substantial clients and to engage with them and then convince them to say use our services and so forth like that, to work out how we can help them out. The biggest challenge is, how do you find these people who go out of their way to be kept hidden? And it's been a problem that really we've had to sit down and nut out a strategy for. Because for the last few years, we've hit that wall and we bounced. Every now and then we get a success, but generally speaking, we hit the wall, we bounced. So each time we begin trying to come up with a new strategy. How do we crack that one? Or do we just acknowledge that we're going to be failures and those sort of people will never be found, and we may as well pack our bags up and go home? But that's not the case. Business is dealing with failure. How do we deal with those failures one after the other? But how do we deal with them, yes, from a business perspective, but how do we deal with those failures from a personal perspective? And that's the challenge. You see, it's one thing to deal with a failure or encounter a potential failure in a business, like I said, whether it's a partnership or issue, or whether it's a loss of a major client, or you're closing a business down and things like this. One thing to deal with that. It's quite another thing to deal with it personally and emotionally, and what goes on inside your head. You put a smile on, everything's wonderful. Thank you for asking. As someone says, "Are you okay?" "Oh, everything's wonderful. Thank you for asking." Because we've got to put this facade on. Or how do we actually wrestle through the issues of life? And that is one of the challenges I find as an entrepreneur, and how to actually wrestle it through. Out of all the things you can possibly do, I think, in life, being an entrepreneur is one of the ones where you'll have the fastest learning experiences or the fastest crashes you've ever seen. Because entrepreneurship, you're living at the cutting edge of really what it means to be a grand explorer of days gone by, where they used to sail the open seas trying to find new lands and everything like that. Now the new lands, if you ask me, are in your pocket in terms of phone, or in your business, or whatever it is. They're the new lands to be explored. And as entrepreneurs, we're sitting right out there on the edge of the limb of a tree, and we begin sawing it off and hoping that we won't quite get through that branch before we actually can succeed in our particular venture. Yeah. So here's a question I'd like to ask, say yourself, Michelle. We tackled this topic a bit last week, dealing with failure. And we heard from a variety of different people and all that sort of stuff. And speaking of which, if you're in the audience right now, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your experiences. Like, how did you deal with failure? What are the things that you do to deal with failure, to deal with those setbacks? Then put your hand up. I'd love to have you on the stage. It'd be great to hear from you. So coming to yourself, Michelle, what's some of the things that you do internally within yourself, not just maybe not so much the external, but internally with yourself? What do you do when you encounter something which could be viewed from the outside as a failure?
Michael, that's a great question. I don't think it's easy for anyone. And, for me, starting from a very young age, growing up in a very, very rough environment, I really had to condition myself to this predisposition that I just have to move forward. Like for me personally, I cannot like take too much time to like for sake of a better word, I'll say just wallow, if you know what I mean. That defeat, for me, I just have to always be like, okay, so that didn't work. How do i how do i fix it? How do I move forward? Moving forward is always, and every day actually, a big theme for me personally, in every facet of my business and personal life. Um, i really have found that for my own personal mental fortitude, I can't dwell on it. I have to just move forward. So it's like, yes, that happened. Okay, just like how do I try to recover? How do I, what did, of course I think, okay, what did I do wrong that I should have done differently? What is the learning lesson? But I'm very much of like how to just move forward. And I know there's people in the audience that have had terribly devastating experiences, and I don't mean to undermine that at all. But I just find if I go there too much, that it's not good. And maybe that's bad. Maybe psychologically that's not bad. Maybe I'm in denial, Michael. But I'm just saying that's how it's worked for me personally. And I'm very interested to hear what other people think. So, if there's people in the audience, because I think all of us has had, disappointments, failures, whether it be relationships or business or, whatever it is, just life in general. Like, I'm very curious, as you said, how people deal with it. For me, I can't go there too much. I have to be able to very quickly pop up and say, okay, here's what the next move is. Thank you.
Yeah, Michelle, is it a case of you're able to compartmentalize? Like, one of the things I find, for instance, is if I'm dealing with an issue and I've got all the other things I've got to wrestle through as well at the same time, then I sort of say to myself, can I impact that now, that failure right now, and or should I just compartmentalize and say I'll deal with that at this point in time, when I've got the mind space to deal with it, or I've got new information that can help me deal with it. And in the meantime, I'm focusing on the rest of my business, and I'm just not going to let that affect me. Is it
Yeah,
more a
that
case
that's
of
a
that?
great question, actually. That's very pointed. Yeah, because some people would say, "Oh, you're just not dealing, and you're just like putting it down." Yeah, I am compartmentalizing it, and I'll be the first to admit it. And yeah, I am putting it down. But you know what? For me, and I, like I said, since the time I was a young age, I will tell you, that's worked for me. You know, is that healthy in the long term? Yeah, that's a great question. So far, it's worked. Maybe it will catch up with me, but so far it has worked. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Michelle, because it's sometimes it's like I do not have the mind space to deal with that issue right now. But what you're actually saying to yourself, but I will at this point in time. And it could be the mind space because you're just in a bad place at that moment because you deal with the emotional impact of what's just happened. And now there's all the actual ramifications of what's occurred. And you say, I'm going to deal with it on my terms and in my way. So I'm going to pack that issue so I can focus on some positive things to drive my business or my life forward in the meantime.
Yeah, and for me, it's like, okay, like just stop a downward spiral. Like it's like cut your losses in a certain way. Like I can't like manage going in a downward spiral. It's just like jump up. That's how I am.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point you're raising just there at the end. I think that one of the challenges that entrepreneurs have is that razor edge of being tenacious or a dog with a bone to the point of I'm never going to let this thing go. I'm going to go to the right very end. And you hear those stories of people who come right to the brink of financial ruin or something like that. But they took that one last step and suddenly everything was successful. There's on that edge. On the other side of the edge of the razor blade is cut your losses, and it's and it's almost like the entrepreneurs sitting on the razor blade of those two things. Should they just keep on going, or should they cut their losses and just move on with life? Yeah, and sometimes to make that decision is a really difficult one because what should you do? Do you cut those losses? Michelle, what do you do in those circumstances? And I know it's going to be circumstantial and all that sort of stuff, but
Oh,
like, how do you
God.
come to a decision in that circumstance?
Yeah, I'm an analytical person, not to the nth degree like you are, Michael, or like Colin is. But for me, I'm a person like, yeah, just show me the facts and the data. I'll sleep on it overnight and I just kind of wake up and I just go with that feeling. And, I'm not trying to bury, so to speak, the issues, but, I think how you approach your team or your investors or your partners is extremely key at that point. I think transparency is kind of an overworked word, and I'm sure Jeff can weigh on that too. But it's just like just being honest and what honestly can we do to move this forward? And if it's just a horrible disaster, just admitting it rather than sinking everybody's time and money into it for another 6 months and just having a disappointing, just bringing down the morale. Like, you garner, respect if you don't let the whole ship sink, so to speak. Like, I think there's always, I say, but there's alternatives. If there's a product you're launching and oh my God, it's just not going to do it, like just kind of admitting to this team, that's slaving and spending all this money before you spend ads, like that's a good thing, right? You salvage yourself. And I think, we have those checkpoints. Colin refers to it as stage gates. That's kind of a project management thing. Just check in with yourself and your team and just like be extremely honest about it. That people can tend to be negative, so you have to like you have to have your own instinct about it, and I think that's the quintessential, essence of an entrepreneur. They do have that like feeling, look at Elon Musk, for God's sake, look what he's been through. Obviously, he is like, he knows it's going to work and he pushed it through thick and thin, like in a,
Hello, can I speak?
you know, way. So, I just think we need to have that feeling ourselves as entrepreneurs and just be really, really candid with our team. First, I would say with our senior management team, next with the team once we're all in alignment. I know that's kind of a long winded answer to what you're saying, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, there's one thing I think about this topic of dealing with failure is there's no magic bullet. There's no like, okay, if you just follow these 1, 2, 3 steps, then it's going to be solved for you. It's not the case. But there's one thing I think that hearing from you then, Michelle, really struck me was you said you get all the facts, you then sleep on it, and then you make a decision the next day. But you actually said an interesting thing there, which is, if I have to paraphrase you, was you let your emotions get involved. You actually let your emotions get involved. You say, I go with my gut then. And it's interesting when I reflect on my own sort of entrepreneurial journey. I'll be in team meetings at times, and I will just ask the different team members, just talk at me, just tell me the facts, what's going on, all that sort of stuff, and I have this sort of mentality of just letting those facts wash over the top of me. And it could be we're trying to solve some very highly technical problem or something like that. I'll just let those facts wash over me, and then I trust my gut. And it's quite an interesting when I really reflect on some of the things I've ended up doing over my entrepreneurial life. Trusting your gut is something which entrepreneurs, as they go on the journey of life, learn to recognize more and more and more. There's something about that essence of, yep, this is right, we need to push through, or hey, this is wrong, we need to cut our losses, or whatever. But I'm going to jump down to Christine in a second, Christine, to hear your thoughts on this topic. But just before we do, Jeff, um, what's your thoughts on what Michelle just said then, where she was trying to explain her process for dealing with failure and so forth?
Yeah, no, I thought Michelle made some great points, and it's this whole topic is so interesting because there's so many different levels of failure, and one of the challenges for an entrepreneur, and I lived through this with a previous company, is when you feel that you're failing, and when you see things going wrong, like Michelle talked about a product that didn't pan out, when you're faced with the challenges of a potentially failing business as the entrepreneur, as the CEO, as the founder, you have to find this balance between the transparency Michelle talked about and at the same time maintaining your leadership role and keeping the morale up, because there's always that gap between when you think your business is failing to when you really decide to pull the plug. And in that interim period, you want to salvage the company. You want to see, can we turn this around? Can we pivot somehow? Can we change something about our business? Do we have to reorganize, change the way we're staffing? Whatever it is, you have that period of time when you're trying to fix it before you give up or pull the plug on it. And during that time, it's so critical to not, you can't walk out to the staff and be the depressed entrepreneur who sees their business failing. You've got to keep your head up and keep the morale up to see if there's a way to turn the ship around, so to speak. But at the same time, you do want to be transparent. I agree with Michelle 100%. You don't want to paint too rosy a picture when you know the ship is sinking. You don't want to go out on the deck of the Titanic and start playing the violin, I guess. So you have to find that balance between being transparent, letting people know that things aren't working out the way that we planned, that there are some real big challenges ahead, but at the same time, keep the morale up and be positive until such time as you really know that this is not going to work and we are going to pull the plug. And then again, transparency comes into play. You want to be as open as you can, as early as you can with your employees so that you give them the best opportunity to move on and make a transition smoothly. So it's complicated. You know, life is complicated, and so is being an entrepreneur, and so is failure.
Yeah, it's an interesting one there, Jeff, of just dealing with those failures and so forth like that, and how we deal with it internally within ourselves. And we don't go into, as Michelle said, that sort of spiral down. But I just want to jump across now to Christine. Christine, you've been very patient. Thank you for doing that. Love to hear your thoughts on dealing with failure.
Well, thank you for letting me speak, actually. It's the first time I happened into this room, and now I'm beginning to think it was serendipitous for my own thought process. But in 1996, I started a .com company, bestselections.com, which was the first conglomerate of luxury goods selling online. And after a year and a half, 2 years, um, the Wall Street Journal valued us somewhere around 300 million. I owned at that point 27% of the company, but I had brought in two people, Bob Harris and Jody Owen, who had taken companies like WorldCom public. And I lost control of the board and I lost control basically of the company. And I constantly overrode my own point of view with the fact that they had been so much more successful than me in everything they'd ever done. And in the end, I saw that we were not making our numbers and we kept raising another round. And I finally said, we can't do this anymore because if we do, we're going to run out of money. And we had a board argument. I lost. And a year later, I then left the company. And a year later, which I started, and a year later, it crashed with the rest of the .com company, with all the rest of the other companies. And it's funny because a number of the board members who had put in substantial dollars, we're talking 5, 10, $15 million in the late 90s, which is a lot of money. A number of them contacted me and said, in the board presentation, we went with them because of their incredible record. And you were just somebody who had a marketing company who started this on the side. And okay, I've told pieces of this story, never quite this way, because until I came into this room, I never considered it a failure. And the way I've told the story over the years is the incredible, powerful lessons I learned. Never give up control of your company. Never take somebody's history and make it override your point of view for that reason only. I mean, I have so many great gifts that came out of it, and I don't want to sound like Oprah Pollyanna or anything. But I think if the focus is on we failed, we failed, we failed, or it just sounds like everybody's talking in a way that comes from a place of fear almost. And I just never thought I failed until I came in here. And so I don't know if it's helpful to anybody, but the point is that it's a long journey. And if you were good enough to be that brilliant in that moment, then you've got another piece of brilliance in you. And the thing that I gained that helped me do very, very well in the ensuing years was I had an incredible team together and they came with me because we were never afraid of what might not work. Um, I got that team at Best Selections. I learned the lessons of, control and leadership and that, somebody has to lead and why not make it me? And so I don't think of these things as failures. And I think the more we focus on, well, what could I have done differently or what should I have done differently or whatever, I think that makes it a little more challenging. So thank you for giving me this time to sort of put some thoughts together that I'd never really thought about until now. So thank you.
Wow, wow.
Krista,
Michael, well, I know I'm
yeah,
not the
go for it,
speaker,
Colin.
but I'm gonna be very quiet. Can you hear me? You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you, Colin.
Yeah, that was very powerful, as Michael was about to say. And I had a very similar situation where in 2000, I had sold my company, but my stock was locked up. It was a publicly traded company, and the company went to over $1 billion in valuation. And Fast forward through the dot-com crash and a bankruptcy, and I ended up the $16 share I ended up selling for 6 cents a share. So it was very, it was a very challenging and emotionally straining time. And I'm just curious, you went through this, you went through this challenge, this failure, whatever you call it. I mean, how did you feel about that? Emotionally, I know I just sort of curled up in a ball and climbed in my, you know, I guess it was horrible. It was horrible. And then just sort of dust yourself off, pick yourself up, and you go and fight another day. And like you said, I think the learning, for me, the learnings, I really believe these startup failures are the scars of our past that guide us through the future, our future endeavors. And, you're an example of that. But I'm just very curious how you dealt with this emotionally.
I don't know, maybe I'm a cold-hearted whatever. I wasn't felled in any way by what happened. In fact, I wanted it to succeed without me because I would have done okay. They offered to buy me out, and because I had a lot of family and friends who put money in, I didn't want to do that. I still had a sort of a seat on the board, or at least I had access to the board. So I stayed and lost my entire. I had put in 90% of my net worth. I never once felt, like crawling under the covers and pulling them up over my head. I thought I was brilliant. And so I don't know. That's why I'm in here going, I think really the word failure, words really matter, and they really have a tremendous amount of power. And maybe it's different for me because I tried to fight on a course that would have been right in the end. And people said that afterward, they wrote about it. But I don't know, maybe that was why. But I never described it in the years afterward. And I do a lot of public speaking. I've never once described it as a failure. And so until this moment, I'll live with the failure, but I don't want to dwell in that. And I think if you dwell in that, look, when you take a hit, you take a hit. But if you were good enough to be an entrepreneur to begin with, to believe that you had a vision to a pathway to somewhere, then that doesn't change just because you have to, you have to have a diversionary explosion that takes you off the road. And again, maybe it's because I'm just, odd or whatever, but I never felt that way.
No, Christine, I think what you're saying is great. You made it to the NFL. You may have not gotten the Super Bowl ring, but shoot, not a lot of people make it to the NFL, right? You launched a company, you raised the money, you did all those things. So they are accomplishments, even if it didn't end up the way you had
No,
hoped.
and I will tell you too that as I run across people, and some people have heard of the company or they read about it at the time, or I was in, it was written about quite a bit. I I just speak about it with pride. I don't talk about that everything crashed. I have a couple of times thought, God, imagine what that company would be today. If we had slowed down the spend rather than trying. What they did back then is you raised as much money as you could and you spent it as quickly as you could, so you could do another round and you could be reevaluated at a higher level. And that's where I thought we made our mistake. So, and I used the word we. It was a great group of people. I had a great time.
Yeah, I think you raised a really interesting point there, Christine, and love hearing your story of just the mental fortitude of how you dealt with it. But there's a thing which is underlying what you're saying, and it is your circumstances don't change who you are. And to me, that's a really powerful thing that many entrepreneurs need to grasp hold of is you may be in really trying circumstances, but it doesn't change who you are on the inside. And and how you actually manage that separation of your circumstances versus who you are will depend upon one thing, I think, and that's your character and how your character has developed over the years of your life. And is that the essence of what it was for you? That if I encapsulated it in one sentence of how you went through that whole sort of that journey with that company at that time, because it definitely, by the sounds of it, it's definitely not a failure. As you said, it's the first time ever you thought, hey, maybe it was a failure. Really, was it a failure, or is that you rose as a person above the circumstances you're in?
No, I have to say, my character wasn't perfect during that time for sure, in that I didn't deal with Bob and Jody directly. I went behind their back to the board initially. I mean, I'm not proud of everything that I did in it. I just don't dwell in a word like failure because I don't, it's just not my nature maybe to do that. And I think though that I have seen people, although I never thought about it again until this conversation today, that wear their failure almost like an albatross around their neck. And I think you all need to be very beware of that, because I don't think that serves you or anyone else well. And you
Well, I'll
know,
say, Christine, that I don't see that in my own personal circumstances, but I have extreme amount of guilt for all of the employees who worked for 10 years, who worked for me, some of them millionaires who lost everything on that failure. So there is still that. It still exists. It's still there. It's still very hard to talk about. And it's obviously very emotional, right? So, the good news is I've failed enough times to learn enough lessons to succeed and do multiple public companies, and a lot of people have done very well, and a lot of my employees have done very well. But the fact of the matter is, I still have that pain. It still exists, even 20 years later.
I can understand that. I'll say one more thing and then I'll be quiet. And that is that just as if the company had made it, it wouldn't have been your success alone. The failure wasn't yours alone. There were a lot of people in there who believed in it, and they could have stood up, and they could. There's a lot. I don't really take the failure of best selections on my shoulders alone, because I surrounded myself with the wrong people, or gave up control of the board, or things that now I would know I'm smart enough not to do. I don't. And by the way, a lot of people lost a lot of money who I care about. But also they invested because they wanted to. I mean, we're all grown-ups, and I don't really take the entire thing on my shoulders, nor do I hope you will forever.
No, no, I do in this case because I was the one who made the decision to sell the company to this company that locked our shares up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, we had the dot-com crash too. So, the fact of the matter is, everyone at that time, every tech company was facing a lot of challenges at that time as well. But, hey man, oh man. And, one thing you said earlier about, I brought it down to two words, or three: liquidity or control. Liquidity or control. So from now on, because I was not in a position of control in that situation, and from then on, I have been, and people have done well with that. So the fact of the matter is, liquidity or control. That's the new mantra.
Yeah, what great words of advice from both yourself, Colin, and also Christine. Yeah, it's an interesting situation. Like when I look at, I had around the same time as you guys had a business failure in the .com space, and all that sort of stuff. And it's when I reflect upon that, those that period of time in my life, it really changed me as a person. For instance, when I see another entrepreneur struggling, I feel it. I actually feel it on the inside because I remember that experience. Right now, I've got a great successful company and everything is good. Companies and everything is good, is going well. But when I hear someone else, I just want to help them out. And people have asked, like, why do you host this room? And it's because of that time in my life where I went through a really difficult circumstances where I thought I was going to lose my house, all those sort of things. And it really comes down to that because I feel entrepreneurs as they go on their journey because of that. If I didn't go through those circumstances, go through those deep waters in my life, I probably would have been an arrogant sod. I hope I'm not an arrogant sod now, that's for sure. But yeah, it's going through that deep water sometimes. It can change you for the positive or for the negative. And one of the things I found it gave me was a deep and lasting empathy for others who are going through their challenging circumstances and to do whatever I can to help them. Sometimes you can't do a thing. Sometimes all you can do is just be an ear to listen, and that's all you can do. And other times it could be that you're able to do something else. But uh, it really does quite often form. It helps you form who you are, or have a recognition of who you are as you go on through those tough times. Um, but it's a really interesting story. Oh, I was just about to jump down Nez, and he dropped out. Sorry about that, Nez. Look, you're listening to The Complete Entrepreneur, and we're discussing something. Obviously, it's really heartfelt. Like, we're hearing Christine and her journey and everything like that. It's been phenomenal. Hearing about her life's experience as an entrepreneur. If you're in the audience right now and you're saying, you know what? Boy, have I got a story to tell you guys. We'd love to hear from you. So please raise your hand, and we'd love to invite you to the stage. But Christine, can I just come back to you now? So, if that's okay with you, when you've gone on this difficult time, you lost control of the board, you're still hanging in there as a shareholder because you feel like there's an emotional obligation, even though mentally you're saying, you know what, I should just sell my shares and all that sort of stuff. But you felt there was an emotional obligation to still hang in there, and now you've gone on this journey since then. Did that experience really help you out as you went on that sort of continued your entrepreneurial journey?
Well, I never filtered my opinion again. You know, for the first year of best selections, I deferred every single time. And so I didn't filter my opinion after that. And we've had great success. I mean, we did Barack Obama's social media plan for his first campaign. We've had some incredible opportunities at my company, so maybe that's part of it too, is that I had a successful marketing company before I closed it to start best selections. But somebody asked in the comments, well, did I leave financially okay? No, I lost 90% of my net worth, and I had been recently divorced from an investment banker, so I did have cash but not anymore, and I had to start all over again. So no, I don't know why. I just didn't think about it that way. So but no, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, uh, that quite often events like that in entrepreneurs' lives help shape them moving forward. And one of the things you said there was you actually express your opinion. And I've actually been guilty of exactly what you've said, that you think that the other people have so much more experience, they obviously know so much more than me, therefore I'm going to defer to them because I want to go along and be successful, like they have become, or something like that. And there's a great line in the movie, I think it was called, was it 13 Days? It was about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And one of the characters in Kennedy's office said, "Yeah, there's something immoral when men or women of good character don't speak up." And I actually took that as a challenge to myself. That I said to myself, "I'm going to speak up." You know what? When I think the business is going in the wrong direction, I'm going to say something. I'm going to speak up and be forthright about it. Is that something that really you've grasped hold of, Christine, in your own journey now? Is you're saying, yeah, that's it. I'm not going to be rude about it or anything like that, but I'm not going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to speak up and say what we need to do.
Well, I think I spend a lot more time evaluating somebody else's comments instead of sort of accepting them based on the armor that they wear of the success that they've had. And so, and I think that's helped me to sort of look at everybody as the emperor with no clothes, if you will. So I don't really know. And I didn't know until I came into this room today that best selections was a failure. I never thought about it that way. And so, and now that I am, I'm sure I'll be journaling about this for the next couple of days, and I'm really grateful that I popped in here. But I don't know, and I don't know I can imagine that if you have a company and you feel you let a lot of people down or something along those lines, but I do think that that's one before I left, before I started the board fight, I called in a bunch of people who I'd brought in and said, "This is what I think. This is where my head is. I just want to let you know. Let me know what you need." I tried to get as many people out as I could after I resigned from my chairman of the board position, and so I did everything I could to get everybody where, to lead as best I could from whatever position I was in. But I guess maybe on some level that was there in me before I started Best Selections. It wasn't necessarily a result of it.
Christine, I think part of why you never thought of it as a failure before, because I think clearly you're someone who is living in the present, right? Living in the moment. And I think a failure, when you look at it, is really just a moment in time. And just like in all of life, it's really best not to dwell on the past and dwell on something that happened in the past. And that failure for all of us, if who've experienced it, that moment has passed. If you dwell on it and continue to live in the past, it's going to be hard to get past it and hard to find your next adventure and your next potential success. So I think it's important to recognize that yes, we may experience failure, but that's a moment in time, and that moment in time is behind us. And while we want to think about it to learn from it, we don't want to dwell in it because there's much more to come after. And for every person who's successful, and that's in all aspects of life, whether it's business, whether it's relationships, anyone who is successful at something, most likely has had failures in that same thing previously that they learned from. So it's just a moment in time that we learn from and then move past and focus on the present.
It's funny you say that, Jeffrey, because my favorite line is that the rearview mirror is smaller than the windshield for a really good reason, and it's worth glancing in it, but it's never worth spending too much time in it.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah, I love that too. It is what it is, right? It's all a bit about attitude. And just if we know we're treating people well, listening to their opinions and weighing things, you know what? That's all we can do. And I think people that live in regret, they know they didn't do that. They know they weren't respectful, they didn't listen, they didn't try their best. That's my personal opinion.
What a great conversation this is. Just hearing about this and that analogy of the rear vision mirror is fuller than the windscreen for a reason. How true. You've got to push through. You've got to push onwards. And I think, Michelle, you said that before of I'm looking forward and I'm taking that next step. It's just so true. I just want to come down to Edna. Edna, look, Christine's raised a whole lot of things. It's been a fabulous conversation of dealing with failure. So, what have you got to share on this topic there, Edna?
Failure is your best friend. Embrace it. I have learned far more from failure than I have from success. And don't get me wrong, success feels really good, but I wouldn't have had the successes that I've had it not been for the failures that I experienced. And even if, you don't have to fail catastrophically, right? Where you've got a business that goes under, although I have had one of those. There's partnerships that I've had that didn't succeed. They failed. I've had a failed marriage. But you learn from those things. And a lot of times, when people repeat the same habits and patterns, that's when you know you really haven't learned your lesson. And so as long as you're taking those lessons and you're putting them into place, and then you figure out, I think the important thing is, to look back and figure out, where did I go wrong? And have a come to Jesus meeting with yourself, right? Where you take full accountability for your actions, because you cannot lay blame on someone else. You had some fault, and or you had something to do with things not turning out the way they were supposed to. Maybe it was a misstep, maybe it was a misspeak, maybe you missed a subtle clue, or maybe you missed a really big clue. But at the end of the day, accountability, taking full accountability for your participation in that, will allow you to grow and move forward onto the next venture that you're working on and have far more success. And you won't repeat the same mistake. Like, most smart people won't repeat the same mistake. Sometimes, there are folks that do, but for the most part, I think, you know, we won't do that. I mean, it's evident with our children as well, Michael. So, I mean, failure for me has been my greatest teacher. I'm very fond of her. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. What a great statement, Edna. Failure is my greatest teacher. How true, how true. You remember two things in life more than anything. I think one is you remember failure and the learning from them, and you remember what I call stolen information. Stolen information is when you're at some event and you hear someone on the other side of the room just talking quietly about you. That's stolen information, and it's amazing what the brain will do. Suddenly, your ears will listen to it. But that's a whole separate conversation. I want to jump across to Sharon here. Sharon, look, thank you very much for coming onto the Complete Entrepreneur. It's wonderful to have you on the stage. So, welcome to the stage, Sharon.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for giving me this spotlight. Christine, I have a question for you because I heard you say you never considered your business a failure, and there's this idea in life that our failures define us. And I'm curious if you had seen the business closing as a failure, if that would have changed your trajectory or your direction, because you would have allowed that to define you in a different way than you did just the closure and saw it as not a failure. If I'm making myself clear, I'm just kind of curious about that.
Interesting. I don't know, but when you asked the question, what came to my mind is there are a lot of different things I've started since then, much smaller. I mean, Best Selections is the biggest thing that that I ever did in this kind of situation, and then I've dropped them because they weren't what I wanted them to be, or I couldn't make them happen, or the moment passed, or someone else did it better, quicker, or what have you. I don't think of those as failures either. I just think of it as part of the trajectory of where I'm headed. So I don't know. Maybe that's just and maybe I'm just stupid. I don't know. Like, it's possible that I'm so narcissistic that I can't even see a failure for what it is. But let's put it this way: I don't care if it was a failure or not, because that's not what's gonna that doesn't make my day. I language really matters to me, and a word like failure is not one that serves me well. So maybe that's why I don't go there. But yeah, if somebody said, well, did Best Selections fail, I'd say yes, but I don't consider it in that same vein. I don't spend a lot of time in it.
I love
Yeah, and I
that,
totally. Well,
Christine,
I'm
what
sorry.
you said. I'm sorry, Sharon.
It's okay.
I love that you said it doesn't serve you well, and it doesn't serve anyone well. I absolutely love that. That's a really good way to frame it. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up with that, Christine, and say that, I do believe very much so that our stories matter, the stories we tell ourselves sometimes, that we allow to define us. And you didn't allow this situation to define you in any way, shape, or form. And so, I congratulate you on that, because sometimes that's a much harder ask than we sometimes are up for. So,
I remember I will say one other thing though. Other people considered it my failure. I remember one journalist who interviewed me after Best Selections closed and said, you started it. Why did you not, there was a board fight. Now we know what it was about. Why didn't you try harder? Why didn't you go public? Why didn't you basically they said I didn't try hard enough to take it down the roadway that I thought was the right one. But even when I was in the board fight, I wasn't sure I was right. So I didn't really feel, I don't know if I would have tried harder if I did. So I can't really go to all those different aspects, but in any quote failure, there are a million decisions that were made by others and yourself. And so it's never one person's failure in anything in business. Maybe it is personally, but it's never just one thing. So, and I think it's really important to remember that.
Yeah, you raised an interesting point there, Christine, where, like, to me, it's really easy to make decisions when they're black and white. Like, you go left, you go right, I know exactly what I got to do. It's more challenging when they're gray and you're not 100% certain of the right outcome. And that's when it's a wrestling. It's a wrestling within yourself. Say if you're on the board and everything like that, there's also a wrestling with the board. What is the best direction for the company to go on? And it's one of those things where I think every entrepreneur will actually go through. They'll go through those times when there's no obvious right answer, and you go along, choose a direction, and let's imagine it turns out to be not the right direction after all. That's not necessarily a failure. You just know that that's not the right direction, and you're going to go in the other one. And I think that's one of the things that as entrepreneurs we need to embrace a lot more of, is that there'll be times when you don't know the right answer. And the question is, how do you get the right answer as fast as possible and for the least amount of cost? There's all those sort of discussions that need to be had. So you can choose the right path for the business and also for yourself. But it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge in running a business. It's a big challenge encompassing that as a person as well. Look, I'm going to jump down to Brian. Brian, I think, was the last person to join the stage here. Brian, it's great to have you on the Complete Entrepreneur. We'd love to get your thoughts on this topic because there's been some great input from the people on the stage here with me, and been so appreciative. So, Brian, welcome to the stage.
Hey, I appreciate it, Michael. Yeah, I just wanted to tap in a little bit about failure, especially when you're starting your own business. If you're gonna fail, hurry up and fail. Hurry up and get it out the way. Learn from it. Pick yourself back up and get better from it. That's what I like to say. If it's gonna happen, let it happen. Just let it happen as soon as possible, so you can learn from it and you go again. You just don't quit.
What a great saying. So hit that wall full on and full speed. Yeah, there's definitely an aspect of that, that's for sure. Oh boy. So you've been listening to the Complete Entrepreneur, and we're dealing with this topic again of dealing with failure. But really, is it failure? Is it really failure? Or is it an opportunity to know that that's not the direction to go in the other way? Like, or is it, and how does it define you as an entrepreneur? Should we let our failures, should we let our circumstances that we're thrust into, should we let them define us? Or is there something stronger inside? Is there some steel inside where rather than actually deferring to the so-called experts, is there that steel inside that we need to speak out in those quite difficult circumstances? There's all different things we can learn from this topic, that's for sure. And it's one that I must admit I found it's been thoroughly enjoyable and I've learned so much from. And can I just say, I appreciate everyone on stage just so much, and the openness in which you've shared, and the forthrightness as well. But I just want to jump to Jeff right now. Love to hear what's happening in startup.club. So what's going on, Jeff? Or Michelle, I don't mind, either of you.
I'll let Michelle take it, and but I will say there's lots of great content, just like this discussion, and it's really great that for 2 weeks now in a row, this topic has led to some really insightful conversations, discussions, and it just shows how important failure is to entrepreneurship that it's filled so much of our time discussing it. Michelle, what's up with Startup Club?
So,
Well, I'll tell you, Michelle might have been. I'll fill in for Michelle. So as you can see, this is just one example of the great weekly shows we have running at Startup Club. This show, The Complete Entrepreneur, is done every Thursday evening at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We've got other shows like tomorrow at 2 p.m. is the Serial Entrepreneur Club Hour, which we do every Friday afternoon. Great topics where we really try to unlock the code behind serial entrepreneurs. What are the things that serial entrepreneurs do again and again and again to achieve success? Sharon, who's on the stage now, Sharon and I host and co-host 2 rooms during the week. On Monday nights, we have Lead with Your Story at 6 p.m. Eastern, and also at 6 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday nights with Paige Howe. We have the Name Game. And the best thing you can do is go over to startup.club, the website for Startup Club. Check out the schedule of events there. Sign up for our mailing list to be kept informed. And we really do appreciate you being a part of this community and listening with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Jeff. I know Startup Club's got something like over 800,000 members, and it's continuing to grow. And why I think there's a real hunger from entrepreneurs out there who want to learn from other entrepreneurs. Can I just say thank you very much to every single person who has been on the stage with me. It's been an absolute privilege hosting this session today in particular, and also to my fellow moderators, Jeff, Michelle, and Colin, who's had to obviously catch his flight. It's been always great having you here with me as we begin to unpack what it means to be an entrepreneur. If you're in the audience right now and you're saying, gee, I just want to hear a bit more from that person, what they've been sharing, don't forget you can click on their photo and you can follow them. And if you're there and you're saying, you know what, I really enjoyed today, then I'd love to see you at 5 p.m. next Thursday. And we're going to be unpacking a really interesting topic, and that is understanding your employees. We're going to be looking at understand your employees and what that actually means. And oh, sorry, my apologies. It's not that next week. It's actually become an irresistible force. We're looking at becoming an irresistible force. How can you, as an entrepreneur, become that irresistible force which can push against those immovable objects? How can you push on through? And what's the things that need to change inside of yourself so you can be that? Um, and it's going to be, I think, a really interesting conversation. So lastly, I want to say thank you very much to all those people in the audience. You've been amazing, and you're the reason why we do what we do. And to be able to have you there and listening away, and feel free to message us, and we'd love to hear from you. Anyway, God bless. May you have a wonderful week this week, and as an entrepreneur in all your different entrepreneurship activities. See you later. Bye.
Hey, Michael, real quick before we take off, just want to make sure that if the people in the audience in the listeners' lounge are not following the club, click on the little green Monopoly house up at the top and follow the club, Startup Club. You can also go to the website at www.startup.club and sign up for our um, our newsletters that go out and be in the know about all the stuff that's going on here on Clubhouse and with Startup Club and entrepreneurship. So the link is up at the top. Follow the club, follow the moderators, and thanks for being here. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks a lot for that, Edna. Appreciate those last words there, and very good and wise words they are. Thanks a lot for that. I'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye.